Welcome to Terrormouth, where the night doesn't just hold secrets, it remembers them. Story 1, *The Vanishing Passenger, USA. It was one of those crisp, late autumn nights in the small town of Marlow, tucked somewhere along the outskirts of Illinois. The kind of night where everything felt both eerie and still, with the wind whispering through the trees and the moon hiding behind thick clouds. For Oliver Beck, a seasoned truck driver, this was just another late-night run on the I-70, a road he had driven countless times. But this night, something would happen that would forever change the way he looked at the world. It was past midnight when he entered the sleepy town, his headlights casting long shadows on the empty roads. He had just picked up a delivery from a warehouse in St. Louis and was making his way eastward. The truck's engine hummed steadily, a comforting sound in the dead of night, and he knew he'd be driving alone for hours, the road stretching out before him like a never-ending ribbon. Oliver had driven this stretch of highway more times than he could count, so he knew the road well. The small town of Marlow was a mere blip on the map, a stop for weary travelers or truckers needing a break. The town itself was quiet, and it seemed like nothing much ever happened there. But tonight felt different. Around 2 a.m., Oliver's truck rolled through the outskirts of Marlow. He'd just crossed a stretch of desolate farmland when he noticed something strange in his rearview mirror. A lone car was following him, moving at a steady pace. It wasn't unusual to have someone on the road, but this car seemed to be staying right behind him, almost too close. His stomach churned slightly, but he shrugged it off. Maybe the driver was just in a hurry. He was nearly at the point where the road split, and the small town came into view. Just as he was about to make the turn, the car behind him suddenly swerved to the side, pulling over onto the shoulder. Oliver glanced in the mirror, his curiosity piqued. The car's headlights flickered, and for a moment, he thought it might be broken down. He felt a brief tug of hesitation, wondering if he should stop to offer help. But then the car's engine roared back to life, and it sped away into the night, disappearing down a side road. Just some random driver, Oliver muttered to himself, shaking his head. Nothing to worry about. The truck rumbled into the town and began to make its way toward the small diner on the edge of Marlow where he usually stopped for coffee. The parking lot was nearly empty, save for a few cars parked along the far side. He pulled in, killing the engine and stepping out into the cool night air. The diner was quiet, a few scattered patrons inside, but nothing out of the ordinary. As Oliver walked toward the entrance, he saw a woman standing by the door, looking out into the empty parking lot. Her figure was draped in a dark coat, her face hidden under the shadow of a wide-brimmed hat. She looked out of place, like she didn't belong in such a small, quiet town. He wasn't sure why, but something about her felt off. He tried to shake off the uneasy feeling and entered the diner. A bell rang as he stepped inside, and the warmth of the diner hit him instantly. The smell of coffee and fresh pies filled the air. He made his way to the counter and took a seat on one of the stools. The waitress, a middle-aged woman with tired eyes, nodded at him as she poured a cup of coffee. "Long night?" she asked. "Yeah," Oliver replied, rubbing his face. "Just passing through." Heading to the next town, the waitress raised an eyebrow. "You know, it's not safe to drive through here late at night." Oliver looked up, confused. "What do you mean?" "The town's been quiet for a long time," she said, lowering her voice. "But strange things have been happening on the highway at night. People have been going missing, just vanishing." Oliver let out a laugh. "What? You mean like a ghost story?" The waitress's face remained serious. "I'm not saying it's ghosts, but Something's going on. People in town have been talking about it for months now. Truckers, travelers, ... disappearing without a trace. Oliver snorted, dismissing the idea. I've been on this road for years. Haven't seen anything strange. The waitress looked at him with a knowing expression. Just be careful out there. He waved it off, finishing his coffee quickly and getting back into his truck. As he fired up the engine and pulled back onto the highway, he couldn't shake the odd feeling from the diner. Maybe it was just the isolation of the place, or the strange woman he'd seen outside. But something didn't sit right. The highway stretched out before him, dark and empty. He drove for another 20 minutes before he noticed something unusual again. A pair of headlights appeared in his rearview mirror. This time, they were moving fast, rapidly catching up with him. Oliver tightened his grip on the steering wheel. The car behind him was gaining speed, its headlights blindingly bright. But as it neared him, something strange happened. It didn't pass. It stayed behind him, almost as though it was waiting for him to make a move. Oliver's mind raced, and a chill crept down his spine. He decided to pull over to the side of the road, hoping to give the car a chance to pass him. But when he glanced in the side mirror, the car was gone. He looked ahead. The road was empty. No headlights, no cars. That's strange, Oliver muttered, shaking his head. Maybe he was just tired, or maybe it was just the isolation playing tricks on him. He took a deep breath and continued driving, trying to shake off the growing feeling of unease. Another 20 minutes passed, and just as Oliver was about to relax, the headlights appeared again in the distance. This time, they were far off, but they were still coming closer, faster. Oliver glanced in the rearview mirror, expecting to see the car again, but there was nothing. No headlights, no movement. Suddenly, a figure appeared in the middle of the road ahead of him. A man, standing still, arms crossed, blocking his path. Oliver slammed on the brakes, screeching to a halt just inches from the figure. The man didn't move. He just stood there, staring at the truck. His face was pale, his clothes ragged, like he had been out there for days. His eyes were wide, empty, and his mouth hung open as if he was gasping for breath. Oliver's heart pounded in his chest. He threw the truck into reverse and backed away quickly, his eyes glued to the figure in the road. He checked his mirrors, but the man wasn't there anymore. Just darkness. His breath came in shallow gasps as he put the truck into gear again and sped off, trying to make sense of what he had just seen. The strange man, the disappearing car, the eerie feeling that had followed him. His mind raced as he drove faster, eager to leave Marlowe behind. As he neared the exit of town, the streetlights flickered and went out. The highway was now completely dark, with no sign of life. But then, just as he was about to take the exit, the same headlights appeared again, this time much closer. He glanced in the mirror, expecting to see the car. But instead, he saw the man standing behind him, in the shadows, still staring at him with those empty eyes. Oliver's heart raced. He slammed his foot down on the gas pedal, speeding away as fast as he could. The figure in the mirror grew smaller and smaller, then disappeared entirely. It was only when he reached the next town that he dared to stop. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting a pale light over the desolate road. He parked the truck at a gas station and took a deep breath, his hands trembling as he stepped out of the vehicle. As he walked inside, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. But when he turned around, there was no one there. Only the empty road stretching into the distance. Later that day, He found out that the town of Marlow had no record of the man he saw on the road. No one had ever seen him before, and the car that had followed him, it was registered to a local resident who had died years ago. The same night that the disappearances began, Oliver never drove through Marlow again. The memories of that night haunted him for years to come. Story 2, The Whistler of Willow Creek. In the small town of Willow Creek, nestled in the heart of rural Oregon, most of the folks had learned to trust the quiet. The kind of quiet where even the winds whisper through the trees seemed deliberate, like the world itself had slowed down, and you could feel the weight of every breath. But that peaceful serenity was shattered one cold autumn evening when Rachel Turner, a young schoolteacher, found herself at the center of an unnerving mystery that would haunt the town for generations to come. Rachel had only been teaching at Willow Creek Elementary for a few months when it happened. She was new to the town, fresh out of college, and eager to make a good impression. She quickly settled into the rhythm of small town life. Morning walks to the schoolhouse, friendly smiles from the townsfolk as she ran errands at the local market, and the quiet, almost forgotten nature of the place. But there was something off about Willow Creek that Rachel couldn't shake. It was the town's strange history, whispered about in hushed tones. Some residents spoke of the place as if it were cursed, like there was something deep within its soil that made the land uneasy. But Rachel, ever the skeptic, pushed the thoughts aside. After all, towns had their rumors, and this was nothing more than that. It wasn't until one evening, while she was walking home from the schoolhouse after dark, that things began to feel ... different. The sun had set hours ago, and the only sound was the crunch of her boots on the fallen leaves as she made her way through the town's narrow streets. The houses along the way were dark, their windows reflecting only the pale glow of the streetlights. As she passed by the old cemetery on the edge of town, she heard a soft, melodic whistle carried on the evening air. At first, Rachel thought it was just the wind, but as she paused, listening carefully, the whistle came again. It was faint but distinct, almost like someone was trying to get her attention. She looked around, expecting to see someone on the sidewalk or a car driving by, but there was nothing. The street was empty. A chill ran down her spine, but Rachel shook it off. Just a bird or the wind, she muttered to herself, trying to calm her nerves. But the whistle came again. Closer this time. She turned quickly, scanning the dark street behind her. Nothing. She took a step forward, the sound echoing in her ears. And then she froze. There, just beyond the cemetery gate, standing in the shadows of the trees, was a figure. A man, she thought at first. But then, something about his posture struck her as odd. His head tilted back slightly, eyes wide, staring at the sky as he whistled. His body was unnaturally still, almost like he was waiting for something. Rachel felt a wave of unease wash over her. She had the strong, almost overwhelming urge to run, but she forced herself to take another step. Her voice came out in a hoarse whisper. "Hello," she called, her heart hammering in her chest. The man didn't respond. Instead, he continued to whistle, his eyes fixed upward as if in a trance. The sound was beautiful, haunting. The melody seemed to reverberate in the air around her, settling deep in her bones. Rachel took a few tentative steps closer. "Are you okay?" she asked, her voice trembling now. The man's head slowly turned, and Rachel's breath caught in her throat. His eyes were black, completely black. No whites, no iris, just deep, endless darkness. He smiled, a slow, deliberate smile that didn't reach his eyes. And then, with the same deliberate slowness, he stopped whistling. "Stay away," he said in a low, rasping voice. "Stay away from Willow Creek." Rachel stumbled back, her feet tangling in the leaves beneath her. She turned and ran, her breath coming in panicked gasps as she raced toward the safety of her apartment. When she finally reached her door, she slammed it shut, leaning against it as though it might protect her from whatever she had just witnessed. The next morning, Rachel tried to shake off the terrifying encounter. She told herself she had imagined it, that the man was just a drunk, or perhaps someone who lived in the cemetery. But deep down, she knew something wasn't right. She had never felt such a cold, inexplicable fear in her life. She tried to forget about it, focusing on her students and her work at school. But as the days passed, she began to notice more strange occurrences. People in town began avoiding her. Neighbors crossed the street when they saw her walking toward them, and shopkeepers seemed to hurry through transactions, their eyes never quite meeting hers. It was as though they were all in on some secret, and she was the only one left out of the loop. One evening, as she was closing up her classroom, Rachel heard the whistle again. This time, it came from the direction of the school's front yard. She froze. It was the same eerie, haunting melody she had heard the night of the encounter. Trembling, she grabbed her bag and rushed out of the building. The town was quiet, as it always was at night. But the sound of the whistle seemed to linger in the air, as though it were coming from every direction at once. Rachel's breath caught in her throat as she saw him again. The man with the black eyes. He was standing by the school's fence, whistling in that same trance-like state. This time, there was no hesitation. He didn't turn to face her. He simply continued to whistle. But then, the air grew colder, and Rachel felt something she couldn't explain. A force, like an invisible hand, pushing her away from him, urging her to leave. She took a step back, her heart racing in her chest, and then turned to run. But as she did, she heard something that made her blood run cold. "Don't leave," the man whispered, his voice carrying in the wind. "You belong here." Rachel didn't look back. She ran all the way home, her mind spinning with fear. That night, she locked all her doors and windows, but the whistling didn't stop. It seemed to echo through the walls, growing louder, closer, until it was almost as if the sound was inside her own head. The next day, Rachel tried to find out more about the man she had seen, but no one in town would talk to her about it. It was as if they were all afraid of saying his name. She went to the local library and searched through old newspapers, looking for any mention of strange occurrences or unusual events. Finally, she found it. In 1923, a man had been found dead on the outskirts of town. He had been an outsider, passing through Willow Creek on his way to somewhere else. The story didn't explain much, except that he had been a traveling musician or whistler. They had found his body by the same cemetery Rachel had passed on her walk. No one knew who he had been with, or what had happened to him, but there was something else before he died. People in Willow Creek said that the man had warned them about something. He had been heard whistling late at night, telling anyone who would listen that something terrible was coming to Willow Creek. Something that would take the town forever. As Rachel read those words, a deep sense of dread washed over her. She felt the weight of the town's curse press down on her. She had crossed some invisible line, and now, the man whom they called the Whistler was coming for her. That night, as she lay in bed, the whistle came again, louder than ever, piercing through the silence like a warning. Rachel tried to ignore it, but the sound seemed to penetrate her every thought. until it consumed her completely. She knew, deep down, that there was no escaping Willow Creek. She had heard the whistle, and now she was a part of it. She was part of the town's curse, just as the man before her had been. And like him, she would never leave Willow Creek. Story 3, The Haunted Bus of Cleary Creek, USA. Cleary Creek was a forgotten town in the Midwest, tucked away between rolling hills and endless fields of corn. The town had become a place where time seemed to stand still, its population a dwindling few hundred people. The old school bus that picked up the children every day had been a staple of life in the town, just like the dusty roads and the creaky old houses. Dave, the school bus driver, had been working the route for over 2 decades. His routine was something he'd grown comfortable with, something predictable. But everything changed on a cold October night in 1998. The bus was nothing special, an old yellow vehicle with chipped paint and cracked windows, its seats worn and uncomfortable from years of use. Dave had driven it for as long as he could remember. The bus route took him through the narrow streets of Cleary Creek, past the old cemetery, the general store, and the edge of the woods that bordered the town. He knew these roads like the back of his hand, and every night, as he drove the empty streets, he found solace in the quiet. But that night, there was a strange sense of unease in the air. It was a Monday evening, and Dave had just finished his last run of the day. The moon was barely visible behind thick clouds, and the town was covered in a thick fog that rolled in from the surrounding woods. The streets were empty, and the only sounds were the squeaks of the bus's brakes and the occasional rustle of leaves. Dave turned the key in the ignition, ready to head back to the bus depot. But as he drove past the old cemetery on the outskirts of town, he noticed something strange. There was a figure standing by the cemetery gates, half hidden in the fog. At first, Dave thought it was a person, maybe someone taking a late-night stroll. But then something about the figure struck him as odd. The man, or whatever it was standing perfectly still, facing the cemetery with his head tilted upward, staring into the sky. The figure was motionless, almost statue-like, and it was as though time had stopped for him. Dave slammed on the brakes, his heart racing in his chest. He threw open the door and stepped out of the bus, expecting to see someone who needed help or had wandered into the wrong area. But when he looked around, there was no one else. Just the fog, thick and suffocating, rolling in from the fields. The figure by the gate was still there, standing as still as ever. "You okay?" Dave called out into the fog. There was no response. The figure didn't move, didn't even acknowledge his presence. Dave's gut told him to be cautious, but his curiosity got the better of him. He stepped forward slowly, his boots crunching on the gravel road. "Hello," he called again, a bit louder this time. The figure's head tilted slightly, as if it had heard him, but it didn't turn to face him. Dave felt a shiver run down his spine. The air was unnervingly cold, and the fog seemed to press in around him, obscuring everything but the shape of the figure. Dave could barely make out any details beyond the shape of the person, just a tall, thin silhouette, dressed in tattered clothes that seemed old-fashioned, as though they were from another time. "Are you all right? Do you need help?" Dave's voice cracked a little as he spoke, but the figure didn't respond. He took another cautious step forward, his foot catching on a loose stone. That's when it happened. The figure slowly turned toward him, its eyes glowing an unnatural shade of black. Dave's breath caught in his throat. The man's face was pale, his skin almost ghostly, and his eyes, those black, hollow eyes, seemed to swallow the light around them. The figure smiled, but it wasn't a friendly smile. It was slow, deliberate, as if the man was savoring the moment. "Stay away," the figure whispered in a voice that sent chills through Dave's bones. "Stay away from Cleary Creek." Dave stumbled back, his mind racing. The words didn't make sense. He'd been driving these roads for years. What did the figure mean? Before he could say anything else, the man turned back toward the cemetery gates, his body moving unnaturally smooth, as if his joints had stopped working the way they should. Dave didn't wait another moment. He ran back to the bus, slammed the door shut, and started the engine. His hands were shaking, his heart racing. But the bus roared to life as he shifted into gear and sped off. For the rest of the night, Dave tried to convince himself that it was just his imagination, that he'd seen something he wasn't meant to see. Maybe the figure was just a lost traveler, but deep down, Dave couldn't shake the feeling that something was horribly wrong. The next day, when he told his fellow drivers about the strange encounter, they all looked at him with a strange expression. "You saw him, didn't you?" one of them asked, almost as if it was a known fact. The man with the black eyes. They called him the Watcher. Legend had it that the figure was a restless soul, trapped in Cleary Creek after a tragic accident years ago. No one knew the full story, but the townsfolk spoke of strange occurrences late at night. Some claimed to hear the sound of footsteps behind them when no one was there. Others said they had seen the Watcher's eyes in the fog, staring into their souls. Dave didn't believe in ghosts or legends, but what had he just witnessed? The figure had been real, and it had spoken to him. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched, that Cleary Creek was hiding something darker beneath its sleepy facade. That night, Dave drove the bus again. His mind kept wandering back to the cemetery, to the figure standing in the fog. The streets were eerily quiet as he passed through the town, and the fog seemed to be rolling in faster than before. He glanced nervously in the rearview mirror, but there was no sign of the Watcher. Still, Dave couldn't shake the feeling that something was waiting for him. The bus turned a corner, and that's when he saw it again. The figure was standing by the cemetery gates, just as before. Its head tilted back, eyes wide, staring into the sky. Dave's heart stopped. The figure didn't move as the bus passed by. It just stood there, waiting. But this time, Dave didn't stop. He didn't turn off the engine, didn't get out to investigate. He didn't want to see what was coming next. When he reached the bus depot, he parked the bus in its usual spot, still trembling from the experience. The other drivers had already gone home, and the lot was empty. Dave was about to head home, when something caught his larger figure standing by the gate. It was the Watcher again. Dave couldn't breathe. This time, the figure didn't wait. It moved toward him, its eyes glowing in the dark, its smile wide and twisted. Dave turned and ran as fast as he could, not daring to look back. As the next few weeks passed, the sightings of the Watcher continued. Some said they had seen him at the old church, others by the cemetery, and still others claimed to have seen him walking down the main street in the dead of night. But Dave never spoke of it again. The bus was no longer just a vehicle for transportation. It was a vessel that carried the Watcher's curse. As for Cleary Creek, the town continued to drift in and out of memory. The streets remained quiet, and the fog would roll in with the moonless nights. And every now and then, someone would swear they saw the Watcher, standing at the edge of the cemetery, waiting for the next soul to cross into his domain. Story 4. The house at the edge of the woods. Canada. It had been a long, cold winter in the small town of Creston, nestled in the Rocky Mountains of British Columbia. The people there had learned to live with the isolation, the biting winds, and the endless snow that could fall at any moment, even in mid. But for all of its beauty, there was something unnerving about Creston darkness that clung to the edges of the town. Stories about the house at the edge of the woods were whispered over mugs of hot tea and campfires, tales of its long abandoned state, and the strange events that had been linked to it over the years. For the most part, the house had been forgotten, buried under snow for most of the year, its broken windows and sagging porch left untouched by time. People tried not to think about it, but everyone knew the stories. The kind of stories that spread like wildfire through a small town. They said the house had once belonged to a family that had moved in years ago, eager to escape the bustle of city life. But shortly after they arrived, strange things began to happen. The house seemed to come alive in the middle of the night, groaning and creaking as if someone were walking through its rooms. People who passed by late at night reported seeing flickering lights through the windows, even though the house had been vacant for years. Some said they heard whispers in the woods near the house, voices that echoed through the trees, speaking in a language no one could understand. Most of the locals avoided the area altogether, taking a wide berth when they needed to travel the mountain roads. But for Danny Mills, the young journalist who had just moved to Creston, the house was a mystery he couldn't resist. He had heard the stories from the locals, of course, but like most newcomers, he brushed them off as mere superstition. After all, this was the modern age, and people didn't believe in ghosts or curses anymore. Or at least, that's what he told himself. It was a crisp autumn evening when Danny decided to take a walk toward the house. The sun had already set, leaving behind a purple and orange glow over the snow-covered trees. The air was chilly, and the ground was crunchy with frost as he made his way through the forest path. The house loomed ahead, its silhouette visible through the trees. The closer he got, the more oppressive the feeling became. It wasn't just the house, it was the forest itself, as if the trees were closing in around him. It felt like something was watching, waiting. Danny tried to push the feeling aside. He was a journalist, after all, and he wasn't one to be intimidated by ghost stories. When he reached the edge of the property, he hesitated for a moment, standing just beyond the old, rusted gate. The house was a dilapidated structure with peeling paint and broken windows, but there was something oddly captivating about it. It seemed to draw him in, like a moth to a flame. He stepped forward and crossed the threshold of the gate. As he did, the temperature dropped, and the hairs on the back of his neck stood up. He couldn't explain it, but it felt as though the house had somehow sensed his presence. Danny's breath came out in puffs of mist as he walked toward the front door. His heart pounding in his chest, the door creaked open with a loud groan, revealing a dimly lit hallway. The air inside was musty and thick, as if the house hadn't been aired out in decades. Danny hesitated, but stepped inside, his flashlight casting long shadows on the peeling wallpaper. The floorboards creaked beneath his feet as he explored the first roomer, small living room with old rotting furniture. The house felt ... wrong. There was no other way to put it. It wasn't just the decaying furniture or the dust that had settled over everything. There was a sense of something alive, watching him from the corners of the room. Suddenly, Danny heard something, a whisper, faint at first, but growing louder. He stopped dead in his tracks, straining to hear. The sound seemed to come from upstairs, from the direction of the bedrooms. It wasn't in any language Danny could understand, but there was no mistaking the tone. It was urgent, pleading. His breath caught in his throat. He wasn't sure why, but he felt drawn to the stairs. It was as though something was calling him, beckoning him to come closer. His feet moved before he could stop them, and before long, he was ascending the creaky staircase. As he reached the top, the whispering grew louder, clearer. It wasn't just one voice. It was a chorus of voices, layered on top of each other, speaking in that strange language that seemed to make his skin crawl. Danny's heart raced, and his pulse quickened. He wanted to turn back, but something told him he had to keep going. The hallway at the top of the stairs was narrow, with doors on either side. One door stood ajar, and as Danny walked past, he saw a faint glow coming from inside. It was an eerie, sickly green light, and it seemed to pulse in time with the whispers. He hesitated for a moment before stepping inside. The room was empty, save for an old rocking chair in the corner, its seat facing the wall. The chair rocked gently back and forth, though there was no wind. As he stepped closer, the whispers intensified, and the temperature dropped even further. The glow from the chair seemed to flicker, like a dying candle. Danny's flashlight flickered and then went out. For a moment, he was surrounded by complete darkness. The only sound, the creaking of the chair, and the whispers that now seemed to be right beside him, as though someone was standing just behind him. He spun around, but no one was there. His heart hammered in his chest. He couldn't see anything, couldn't hear anything except the whispers and the rhythmic creaking of the chair. It felt like he was being surrounded by something he couldn't understand. Something that had been waiting for him to arrive. The chair suddenly stopped rocking, and the room grew deathly still. Then, without warning, the door slammed shut behind him. Danny jumped, his pulse pounding in his ears. He reached for the doorknob, but it wouldn't budge. His fingers trembled as he tried again, but the door was locked from the inside. Suddenly, the whispers stopped. A cold, oppressive silence filled the room. It was the silence that came before something terrible. And then, out of the corner of his eye, Danny saw it. A figure, standing in the farthest corner of the room. It was tall, its limbs twisted in unnatural angles, its face obscured by shadow. But Danny could feel its eyes on him, dark, hollow, empty eyes that seemed to bore into his soul. The figure stepped closer, its body jerking unnaturally as if it were being pulled by invisible strings. Danny's breath caught in his throat, and he stumbled backward, his mind screaming at him to escape. He slammed into the door, but it still wouldn't open. The figure continued to move toward him, its twisted form growing closer and closer. Just as he thought he would be consumed by the darkness, the door suddenly flung open. Danny bolted out of the room, his heart racing, his legs nearly giving out beneath him. He didn't stop to look back, didn't stop to wonder what that thing in the corner had been. All he knew was that he needed to get out of the house, away from the whispers, away from whatever was haunting the place. He ran down the stairs, through the dimly lit hallway, and out the front door. As he stood outside, gasping for breath, the temperature slowly began to rise, and the air no longer felt as oppressive. Danny didn't look back at the house. He couldn't. He knew the stories, and now, he was part of them. The house at the edge of the woods was still there, waiting for its next victim. Story 5. Asterisk, title: The Cursed Highway, USA, in the mid-1980s. There was a small town in Wyoming, nestled in the mountains, called Red Hollow. It was the kind of place you'd pass through quickly, never really stopping, except for the occasional fuel stop or to grab a bite at the local diner. The people of Red Hollow rarely ventured beyond the town, and most of them were content with their quiet lives. But there was one road that no one dared drive after dark. Highway 89. Highway 89 ran along the edge of the town and cut through dense woods and rugged terrain, connecting Red Hollow to the rest of the state. It was a road you had to take if you were headed out of town, but after sunset, most people made sure they avoided it. Everyone knew the stories of people who had driven down that road and never returned. Others spoke of hearing voices from the woods, of strange lights flickering in the distance, and the eerie sound of tires on an empty road late at night. Even though everyone warned me about it, I was young, full of bravado, and didn't believe in ghost stories. I had just moved to Red Hollow a few weeks ago, fresh out of college and desperate for work. I had been living in a small, cramped apartment in the heart of the town, but the local mechanic's shop was hiring. It didn't pay much, but I needed the money, and I figured I could make the most of it. One Friday night, after finishing a late shift at the shop, I was heading back to my apartment when I realized I'd left my phone at work. Without thinking, I decided to take the quickest route, back Highway 89. The road stretched through the mountains, and while I'd heard the warnings, I didn't believe them. As I drove, I could feel the weight of the silence. The air felt thick, oppressive, like it was holding its breath. I was driving along, lost in my thoughts, when I noticed something strange. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light, but when I saw it again, I knew something wasn't right. In the distance, there was a faint flicker of yellow light, almost like the headlights of a car. But the glow was too dim, too far off to be a car. It was like a lantern hanging in mid-air. I slowed my car, squinting into the distance, trying to make out what it was. The glow started to move. I thought maybe it was a person, walking along the highway, carrying a lantern. But when I looked closer, I realized that the figure was floating, not walking. My heart began to race, and the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I considered turning back, but curiosity got the better of me. I had to see what it was. I drove closer, my headlights casting long shadows on the road ahead. The glow grew brighter, and as I reached the spot where I had seen it, I stopped the car. There was no one there. The light was gone. I was left alone in the cold, silent darkness. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what I had just seen. I sat in my car, frozen, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. I told myself it was just a trick of the light, or maybe someone playing a prank. But deep down, I knew it was something else. Something unnatural. Suddenly, I heard a noise. It was faint at first, like a whisper carried by the wind. But it grew louder. It wasn't a voice, not exactly. It was like the sound of a distant drum, thumping in the background, growing in intensity. It felt like it was coming from the trees, from the very earth beneath me. The ground beneath my feet seemed to vibrate with the sound. I started my car and drove away, my heart pounding in my chest. The road ahead seemed to stretch on forever, the headlights illuminating the dark, empty highway. The sound of the drums grew louder, pounding in my ears. It was as if the entire forest was alive, watching me. I drove faster, my eyes darting back and forth, trying to make sense of the dark shadows that seemed to move in the corners of my vision. The trees loomed over the road like twisted, gnarled fingers reaching out to grab me. My mind raced with thoughts of turning around, but I couldn't. I had to keep going. There was no other choice. And then, just as I thought I couldn't take it anymore, the sound stopped. The road ahead was silent. Too silent. I felt the tension in the air dissipate, but in its place, something even more unnerving crept into my bones. The world outside seemed too still, too quiet. No rustling leaves, no wind, no animal sounds. Just complete silence. I glanced in my rearview mirror. There, in the distance, was the light again, the same yellow glow, floating in the trees, moving along the road just behind me. I could see it clearly now, and my heart sank. It wasn't a lantern, not a light at all. It was a figure, a person dressed in tattered clothing, walking just behind my car. Following me, I slammed my foot on the gas pedal. I could feel my pulse in my throat. My hands slick with sweat as I sped down the road, the figure always just behind me, never quite catching up, but never falling behind. The trees seemed to close in around me, their twisted branches reaching out like fingers, blocking the road ahead. The light stayed with me, getting closer and closer, until it was right next to my car. I looked out the side window. There was no one there, but the light kept floating, just inches away, moving in sync with my car, as though it was attached to me. My breath was ragged, my heart a drumbeat in my chest, and I didn't know how much longer I could take it. Suddenly, the car jerked violently, as if something had grabbed hold of it. I swerved, trying to regain control, but the steering wheel felt heavy, like someone or something was trying to turn it. My vision blurred as I fought to stay on the road, but the headlights flickered and died. I was plunged into complete darkness. The car kept moving, as if it were being pulled forward with no input from me. The sound of the drums returned, pounding in the background. I could feel the presence all around me, closing in. I knew there was something in the woods, something that had been waiting for me, something that had been drawn to the road. The car finally came to a stop, and for the first time, I was able to breathe again. I didn't get out of the car. I didn't even look around. I just sat there, my hands trembling on the wheel, too afraid to move. I didn't know how long I sat there, frozen in place. But when I finally gathered the courage to open the door, the light was gone. The silence that followed was deafening. I turned the car round and drove back toward town, my hands still shaking, my mind reeling with the horrors I had witnessed. When I reached the town limits, I felt a strange sense of relief. But I knew, deep down, that I would never drive down Highway 89 again that night. I locked every door and window in my apartment and stayed awake until morning. I never told anyone what happened. The town of Red Hollow continued to thrive, but I knew the truth. There was something on that road, something ancient and malevolent, a presence that had been waiting for me, and now I knew better than anyone. Highway 89 wasn't just a road, it was a place of the lost. A place where the past never dies, and where those who drive it never leave. Story 6. The Echoes of Hollow Creek, USA. In the remote hills of southern Appalachia, the small town of Hollow Creek had lived in the shadows for generations. It was the kind of place that didn't appear on most maps, tucked away behind thick woods and winding roads that seemed to stretch into endless darkness. The town itself was old enough to have its own stories, its own secrets, and a history that no one wanted to talk about. People who lived in Hollow Creek kept to themselves, never leaving much behind in the way of records or memories. It was a town that had once thrived with coal mines and bustling industry, but had fallen into a quiet, eerie decay after the mines shut down in the 1940s. Since then, no new faces came to settle there, and no one ever really left. Those who had been born in Hollow Creek were bound to the place, like a dark, invisible tether that kept them from straying too far. That is, until Chris Cooper arrived. Chris was a young journalist, fresh out of college, with a fascination for obscure, forgotten places. His interest in Hollow Creek began with an article he'd found in the dusty archives of a small library in the city. The article mentioned strange disappearances, odd lights in the woods, and a town that seemed to almost vanish from history. Something about it intrigued him, so he packed his bags and made his way to Hollow Creek, determined to uncover the truth behind the town's unsettling past. When he arrived, the town was just as he had imagined: lonely, silent, and strangely deserted. The streets were empty, and the few remaining buildings were worn and weathered, their windows dark and vacant. The only sign of life was an old woman sitting on a rocking chair on the porch of a run-down house at the edge of town. She didn't wave, nor did she greet him. She simply stared at him, her gaze cold and calculating, as if she knew exactly who he was and what he was looking for. Chris approached the old woman cautiously. "Excuse me." "Ma'am," he said, his voice breaking the eerie silence. "I'm looking for information about the history of this town." She didn't respond at first, just continued to rock back and forth. Finally, after a long pause, she spoke in a low, gravelly voice. "You don't want to know about this place," she said, her eyes narrowing. "People come here looking for answers, but they never find what they expect." Chris felt a chill run down his spine, but he didn't let it deter him. He needed the story, and he wasn't going to leave without it. "I just need to know about the people who used to live here. The history," he pressed. She sighed a deep, long breath before nodding slowly. "The people of Hollow Creek don't leave. Not for long. If you're not careful, you'll end up just like them, a shadow that's stuck here forever." Chris was about to ask what she meant when a sudden, loud noise interrupted the conversation. A rustling sound came from the trees behind the house, followed by an eerie, high-pitched whistle. It sounded like a person calling out, but the voice was strange, hollow, and distant. The old woman stood up abruptly, her eyes widening as she stared into the woods. "You need to go. Now," she hissed, her voice trembling with fear. Before Chris could ask her why, she turned and shuffled into the house, slamming the door behind her, confused and unnerved. Chris glanced at the woods where the strange noise had come from. The forest was dense, the trees almost black against the dimming sky. The whistle came again, this time louder, followed by a faint echo of footsteps that seemed to circle around him. The air grew heavy, thick with an unexplainable tension. Against his better judgment, Chris made his way toward the woods, feeling an urge to follow the sound, to uncover whatever mystery lay beyond the trees. As he stepped deeper into the forest, the feeling of being watched intensified. The air felt colder, and the whistle became sharper, more insistent. It was as if the forest itself was alive, pulling him deeper into its grasp, after what felt like hours of walking through the oppressive darkness. Chris stumbled upon something that made his heart stop, a clearing in the woods. In the center of the clearing was a large, ancient oak tree, its gnarled branches stretching toward the sky like twisted fingers. Beneath the tree was an old stone well, its surface cracked and weathered by time. The whistle stopped. Chris stood there, his breath caught in his throat, staring at the well. There was something about it, something off. The well was ancient, yet it seemed almost too well preserved, like it had been untouched for years but still maintained an eerie presence, without thinking. He approached the well and peered inside. The darkness below was suffocating, but there was something faintly glowing in the depths. Something that flickered like fireflies. Suddenly, a cold hand gripped his shoulder, and Chris spun around in shock. The old woman was standing behind him, her face pale and twisted in terror. "I told you not to come here," she whispered urgently, her voice strained with fear. "You've seen it. Now it's too late." Before Chris could ask what she meant, the ground beneath him began to tremble. The whistle returned, louder now, echoing from the well itself. The air grew thick with a strange, heavy fog that seemed to roll in from nowhere. As Chris looked around, the trees in the forest began to shift, their shapes distorting and twisting like they were alive. "Run!" the old woman screamed. "Run before it takes you." But it was too late. The forest seemed to come alive, its branches stretching out like long, twisted arms. They reached for him, pulling him toward the well. The air was thick with the sound of the whistle, a sound that seemed to come from every direction at once. The ground beneath Chris' feet turned soft, like quicksand, pulling him down as if the earth itself was trying to swallow him whole. He fought against it, but it was no use. The more he struggled, the more the earth clung to him, the fog closing in around him like a suffocating blanket, and then, as quickly as it had started, everything went silent. The forest was still. The fog had lifted. The well was gone. And so was the old woman. Chris was alone. When he returned to town, he found it completely deserted. The buildings were abandoned, the streets empty, as if everyone had vanished. He searched for answers, but no one had ever heard of Hollow Creek. As he stood there, staring at the empty streets, he realized something horrifying. Hollow Creek had never been real. It had been a place trapped in time, a place that had existed for centuries but was never meant to be found, and now it had claimed him. Story 7: The Shadows of Millersville. Millersville was a small, forgotten town in the backwoods of northern Kentucky. It had no bustling businesses, no tourist attractions, and was rarely mentioned on any map. It was a place where time seemed to stand still, and for good reason. People who grew up there didn't leave, and the ones who tried rarely made it past the age of 30. The town was cursed. Everyone knew it, but no one ever spoke about it directly. They simply nodded and carried on, living their lives as quietly as possible, hoping to avoid the inevitable. Evan Miles, a seasoned horror writer from Louisville, had heard about Millersville many times. He had researched urban legends for years and often sought out new places to fuel his stories. He loved the thrill of uncovering dark, forgotten places with sinister histories. So when he came across a strange online post about Millersville post that referenced unexplained deaths and strange disappearances, dating back over 50 years, he couldn't resist. Armed with a notebook, a camera, and a skeptical mindset, Evan drove into the desolate town one crisp autumn morning, expecting to gather material for his next novel. What he didn't expect was to be swept into the terrifying and very real horror that had plagued Millersville for decades. The welcome that wasn't as Evan pulled his car into the empty, winding road leading into Millersville. He felt a distinct sense of isolation. The town appeared abandoned, no people, no cars, just empty houses with shattered windows and overgrown yards. The further he drove, the more the air seemed to thicken, as though the land itself held its breath. He reached the main street, a short stretch of cracked pavement with faded storefronts that looked as though they hadn't seen a customer in years. The town's only establishment, a small, run-down diner, was the only building with its lights on. Evan decided to stop in and get some local insight inside the diner. The only sound was the clink of the cash register and the sizzle of a griddle in the back. The lone waitress, an older woman with hollow eyes, looked up from her task and gave him a faint, unsettling smile. "Not many visitors around here," she said, her voice barely audible. "You looking for something, son?" Evan hesitated before responding. "Just passing through. I'm a writer, researching some of the local history. I read something about strange occurrences here." Her smile faded instantly, replaced by a look of profound sadness. She wiped her hands on her apron and stepped back, as though the mention of the town's history had disturbed her deeply. "You don't want to dig too deep in Boy," she warned, her voice trembling. "The town has a way of keeping its secrets. People don't come back after they go looking." Evan felt the hairs on the back of his neck rise. He was no stranger to eerie tales, but there was something in her tone, something in her eyes, that made him feel this wasn't just a local myth. He pressed her further. "Who would I talk to about the history?" he asked. The waitress looked over her shoulder nervously, as if she feared someone might be listening. She leaned in closer, whispering, "Talk to old Tom at the gas station. He knows more than he lets on. But remember, no one talks about it openly." Evan paid for his coffee, thanked the woman, and left the diner with a growing sense of unease. It was clear now that Millersville was hiding something, a secret that had festered for generations. The gas station. Evan drove to the gas station, which was little more than a shack on the outskirts of town. The station was old, the pumps rusted and outdated, but there was a faint glow of life inside. An elderly man, Tom, stood behind the counter, cleaning a set of keys. When he saw Evan enter, he didn't smile. He didn't even acknowledge him at first, but simply stared at him with an air of resignation, as though he had seen this moment 1,000 times before. "You're here for the stories," Tom said, finally breaking the silence. "I can tell." Evan nodded, taking a seat at the counter. "I heard there's something strange about this town. Something ... dangerous." Tom's expression darkened. He set down the keys and looked around the room, as if ensuring they were alone. "The curse of Millersville," he muttered, more to himself than to Evan. "It's not just a story. It's real. And it's been here longer than anyone can remember." Evan leaned forward, intrigued. "What happened?" Tom looked up at him, his face pale and drawn. "There's something in the woods," he whispered. "Something that comes at night. People think it's just a myth, but it's not. It's real. It's always been real." Tom went on to tell Evan about the disappearances that plagued Millersville since the 1950s. People would go missing, young people, mostly vanishing into the woods at night. The townspeople didn't speak about it openly, but the disappearances were always linked to a series of strange lights in the sky or unsettling noises coming from the trees. Some said it was a creature that stalked the town. Others whispered about rituals long forgotten. But Tom had his own theory. "It's not the woods or the creature you need to worry about," he said, his voice low and strained. "It's the shadow. The thing that moves between the trees. It follows anyone who dares to venture too far, and it doesn't let go." The night in the Woodshaven couldn't shake the feeling that the town's curse was tied to the woods that surrounded it. As the sun dipped below the horizon, he made his way toward the edge of the forest, determined to find answers. He wasn't sure what he was expecting, but he couldn't ignore the pull of the unknown. The air grew colder as he entered the woods. The trees were tall and dense, their branches swaying in the wind, but there was no birdsong, no rustling of animals. It was eerily silent, as if the forest was holding its breath. Evan walked deeper into the woods, his flashlight casting long shadows on the trees. Suddenly, he heard a low, guttural growl that seemed to come from all around him. He froze, his breath catching in his throat. The growl was followed by the unmistakable sound of footsteps, heavy, deliberate, and far too close for comfort. His heart raced as he turned to run, but his legs wouldn't move. The shadows in the trees seemed to stretch, closing in on him. The growl came again, louder this time, and Evan could see something shifting between the trees. It wasn't an animal. It wasn't human. It was something else, something monstrous suddenly. The figure lunged from the shadows, its eyes glowing with a malevolent light. Evan screamed, but his voice was swallowed by the darkness. The final truth: the next morning, Evan's car was found abandoned on the outskirts of the woods. His camera and notebook were still inside, but there was no sign of him. The people of Millersville claimed they didn't know anything, and the local authorities chalked up Evan's disappearance to an accident in the woods. But Tom knew better. "They always come back," he muttered, his voice hollow. "Once the shadow has marked you, you're part of Millersville forever." Evan's story became another whispered legend in a town full of secrets. And in the woods, the growls of the shadow echoed once more. Story 8, Asterisk, The Return of the Black Mirror. The town of Westbrook was small. A quiet place with little to no crime or drama. Nestled on the outskirts of a thick forest, it was a town that seemed stuck in time, comfortably mundane. Full of old houses with creaky floorboards and overgrown gardens. It was the sort of place where everyone knew everyone else, and strangers were a rare sight. It wasn't always like that. Years ago, Westbrook had been a town full of energy and life. The people who lived there were happy, working in the mills or running businesses downtown. But that changed when the Black Mirror appeared. It wasn't always called that, of course. Back then, it was just an old antique shop on the corner of Maple Street, a place full of trinkets, forgotten heirlooms, and oddities that no one really paid attention to. The shop was run by an elderly woman named Miriam, who had lived in Westbrook for as long as anyone could remember. Miriam was a quiet, unassuming woman, always keeping to herself. But there was something strange about her shop, an unsettling aura that made the hairs on the back of your neck stand up whenever you walked past. Then, one day, Miriam disappeared. Her shop was left untouched. The windows covered in dust, the door locked and untouched. No one knew what happened to her, and despite the whispers around town, no one cared enough to look further into it. That was until a young man named David Moore moved into the house next door. David had just finished college and was looking for a fresh start. Westbrook, with its peaceful surroundings and small-town charm, seemed like the perfect place to escape the fast-paced life of the city. He had heard the rumors about Miriam's disappearance, but he was a practical man, someone who didn't buy into ghost stories or small-town gossip. It was only when he first stepped into Miriam's shop that he realized something wasn't right. The Black Mirror. David had spent his first few weeks in town settling in, getting to know his neighbors, and starting his new job at the local hardware store. It wasn't much, but it was a start. One evening, as he was taking a walk around town, he passed by the shop that had been abandoned for years. It was odd, he had always assumed it was a private home, but the faded sign outside read Miriam's Antiques. Curiosity got the better of him, and he tried the door. To his surprise, it creaked open. Inside, the shop was dark, the air stale with the smell of old wood and dust. Shelves lined the walls, filled with books, trinkets, and strange objects that David had never seen before. But in the center of the room was a large mirror, framed in dark wood, its surface a perfect reflection of the dimly lit room. There was something about it that made his heart race, something that drew him closer. It wasn't the reflection in the mirror that unnerved him, it was the emptiness around it. The mirror seemed to reflect not only the room, but also something else. It was as if the reflection was off-kilter, slightly warped, as though the world in the glass was different from the one he stood in. He stared at it for what felt like hours, captivated by its strange allure. But the longer he looked, the more he realized something was wrong. The reflection wasn't exactly what it should be. There were shadows in the glass figures moving in and out of focus. At first, he thought it was a trick of the light, but then he saw them clearly, shapes, human-like but twisted, with empty eyes and distorted limbs, moving through the reflection as though they were trapped in another world. David stepped back, his pulse quickening. He reached out a hand to touch the glass, but as his fingers neared the surface, a cold, sharp sensation ran up his arm. The mirror seemed to hum, the air around him growing thick with an unnatural chill. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, everything stopped. David's reflection was back to normal. The room was silent. The figures had vanished. He stood there for a moment, uncertain whether what he had seen was real. The mirror was just a mirror, right? But he couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't, that somehow, something had been staring back at him from the other side. The strange occurrences the next few days passed uneventfully, but David couldn't stop thinking about the mirror. He found himself returning to the shop more often, each time more drawn to it than the last. Each time he stood in front of the glass, the feeling grew stronger. It was as if the mirror was calling to him, begging him to look deeper. One night, as he sat alone in his living room, he heard a knock at the door. It was a neighbor, an older woman named Carol, who lived 2 houses down. She seemed nervous, her hands trembling as she spoke. "You've been to Miriam's shop, haven't you?" she asked. David nodded, a little surprised by her question. "Yeah, I've been by a few times. Why?" Carol glanced over her shoulder, her voice dropping to a whisper. "You need to stay away from that mirror. It's cursed, you know." Miriam, she was the last one to get too close. And look what happened to her. David frowned. "What are you talking about?" Carol took a deep breath, her eyes darting nervously. "There's a reason Miriam's shop was abandoned. The mirror takes people. It traps them. You can see them in the reflection, but they're not really there. And once you look, once it calls you, it doesn't let go." David shook his head, dismissing her warning. "I'm sure it's just a myth." But Carol's eyes were wide with fear. "No, David, it's not. It's real. People go in there, look into the mirror, and they don't come out. They vanish, just like Miriam did." David laughed it off, but deep down, he felt a pang of unease. That night, he couldn't sleep. His mind kept returning to the mirror. The shadows, the figures, the disappearance over the next week. David became obsessed with the mirror. Every spare moment he had, he found himself at Miriam's shop, staring into the glass. Each time, he saw more figures, more shadows, and even more disturbing images. It was as though the mirror was showing him a dark version of the world, a twisted reflection of reality. One evening, he arrived at the shop to find the door wide open, as if someone had been waiting for him. He stepped inside, his heart pounding in his chest. The shop was eerily quiet, but the mirror was calling him. He walked towards it, drawn by a force he couldn't explain. He reached out a hand to touch the glass, but as his fingers made contact, the surface rippled, like water disturbed by a stone. Suddenly, everything went black. David woke up in a place he didn't recognize. He was lying on the ground, surrounded by tall trees and thick mist. He stood up, his head spinning, and looked around. The world was different, twisted, somehow. The colors were muted, and the shadows seemed to stretch unnaturally long. It was as if he was still looking into the mirror. And then he saw them. The figures from the mirror were standing in front of him, staring at him with empty eyes. They were real now, or at least they seemed real. Their twisted bodies moved toward him, their hands outstretched. He tried to run, but his legs wouldn't move. The world around him was closing in, the shadows growing darker, the figures growing closer. The last thing David saw before the darkness swallowed him was his own reflection, staring back at him from the mirror in the distance. The aftermath the next morning. The townspeople found the door to Miriam's shop wide open, but there was no sign of David. His car was still parked outside, but he was gone. It was as if he had vanished without a trace, just like Miriam. The shop was left untouched, the mirror still standing in the center of the room, as though nothing had happened. But the townspeople knew better. They had seen it before. And now, David was just another name in the long list of those who had vanished from the town, claimed by the Black Mirror.